Hello and welcome to The Sofa, where we sit down with some of the most interesting participants here at the World Water Week to learn more about the array of water-related issues being discussed this week in Stockholm. All Sofa sessions are being streamed at vimeo.com/siwi, where they're also available on demand. My name is Eric Paglia, and in this session, we'll be talking about a collaboration between Conservation International and the Strategic Decision Core of the Water Center for Latin America and the Caribbean. Each of these institutions has developed strategic projects regarding water sustainability, and they're now combining their efforts to contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals, including water and sanitation in Latin America. And I'm joined here on the sofa by Alberto Mendoza Domínguez, Director of the Water Center for Latin America and the Caribbean at Tecnologico de Monterrey in Mexico. We have Lina Serrano, Researcher and Project Coordinator at the Water Center for Latin America and the Caribbean, and Vollmer, Director of Freshwater Science and the Freshwater Health Index at Conservation International. Welcome you all to the sofa.
Thank you.
Very nice to have you here. So Alberto, perhaps we can start with you. Can you please explain how the Water Center is working towards sustainable water resources in the region?
Yeah, sure. First of all, Eric, it's a pleasure to be here. We are very excited. Lina, Derek, and myself are sharing these experiences that we have had. And for starters, you know that Latin America faces very big challenges on water issues. More than 80 million people in Latin America do not have access to safe water. More than 100 million inhabitants have problems accessing sanitation. And in all of this, we acknowledge that there are a problem that we need to be facing. There are not enough facilities for water treatment and purification. We have issues on getting smarter ways to finance infrastructure. Surface water and groundwater pollution are issues, and there's a lack of governance. And on top of that, we need to also acknowledge that this region is very vulnerable to climate change and hydrometeorological events. These have had severe consequences, both on economic and human losses. So in all of this, we at Tecnologico de Monterrey, which is arguably one of the two most important universities in Mexico and has been ranked top 10 in Latin America, we acknowledge that we need to put an effort to provide solutions to the region. And 10 years ago, with Fundación FEMSA and the Inter-American Development Bank, we partnered to create the Water Center for Latin America and the Caribbean, which is a research and development center that also provides capacity building for the region. And in all of this, it has been core to the activities in the center, besides technology development, scientific studies. We have centered our attention on solving poor water management issues, lack of governance, and trying to provide a platform to have better informed decision-making processes. And in all of this, 2 years ago, again with Fundación FEMSA and the Inter-American Development Bank, with the IDB, we launched our Strategic Decision Core, which in Spanish is Núcleo Estratégico de Decisiones, or NED for short.
Okay, well, we'll stick with Ned for the rest of this interview. Okay, as you mentioned, the decision-making is a specialty there at the Water Institute, or the Water Center. Can you tell us more about the importance of supporting decision-making in the water sector?
Yeah, the idea and the concept is actually quite simple. We scientists and academia, sometimes we have a hard time trying to convey the ideas or the solutions that we are getting all the way to public policy making. So basically the NED, what it tries to do is bridge the gap between scientists and public policy making through a participative process in which stakeholders are also involved since the beginning of these projects, in such a way that when we get a solution, a final solution, this is well taken by all the stakeholders.
Can you give us some examples of what you've been working with NED?
Sure. In the past couple of years, we have been working with 2 pilot projects. And the first one, I believe, is a quite interesting story, because in 2014, there was this very big project that was being thought about for providing water for the city of Monterrey. Monterrey is the third largest city in Mexico. It has 4.5 million inhabitants, and its setting it's quite challenging because it's a region where it's very vulnerable. It's has severe water stress. So there were many solutions being thought for the region, and one of those, which we call Monterrey Seis, basically wanted to bring water for very close from the Gulf of Mexico all the way to the city of Monterrey. 400 kilometers away, there was a $3 billion plus minus project, a very large project, and there were a lot of questions on the financial viability of the project. So basically what we did at the NED was bring together the stakeholders, start from asking the right question, which was not should Monterrey say should go or no go. It was a question of what would be the best solution for the city of Monterrey, and with many people from academia, from the government, from the private sector, from NGOs, we basically perform a study where, and this is the most important part of NED, which is a participatory process in which everybody got together, made the decisions of what were the best modeling tools, the best databases that should be used, and to finally provide solutions, technical, economic, social solutions for the problem. And currently, that particular project is sitting in the desk of the governor of the state, waiting for a solution. And that was one very exciting story. And for the other one, I would let Nina take over and talk much more about this.
Okay. And that story being in the collaboration with Conservation International. Yeah. So Lina, perhaps you could tell us a bit about that and how it originated.
Well, after we finished the first pilot project, we wanted to continue promoting actions that could contribute to build water sustainability in Latin America. So we launched a call for proposals to find an innovative project that could contribute to these participatory processes and trying to bridge the gap between the stakeholders, policymakers, academy, government, private sector. So we started to communicate about this call for proposals, and CI submitted a project. It was selected after a very exhaustive evaluation process, and we started as a result this collaboration. We joined our efforts to help contributing with reliable scientific information, applying the Freshwater Health Index, which is a tool that was developed by CI, that we are applying in 3 basins: the Alto Mayo in Peru, the Guandu Basin in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and the Conservation Corridor in Bogota. So 2 of these 3 basins represent the main challenges of Latin American cities with respect to water. The Alto Mayo in Peru is a great example of the opportunities and the problems of the Amazon basins. So we are joining our efforts to provide scientific information that decision makers and stakeholders can use for the decision-making process, but at the same time we are creating new opportunities to communicate and to create dialogue between sectors that in many cases don't communicate to one another.
And we happen to have the developer, one of the developers of the Freshwater Health Index here on the sofa, Derek. Perhaps you can explain what it is and how it works in practical terms.
Sure. So the Freshwater Health Index, or the FHI as we call it for short, is in essence a decision support tool that we've developed, and it's our attempt to take complex data and information about water resources, ecosystems, and the stakeholders and beneficiaries of healthy water systems, and put those all into indicators on a 0 to 100 scale. So it's an attempt to simplify the information, sort of like the Dow Jones Index or the NASDAQ, where you can say if it's going up, it's good, if it's going down, it's bad. Now, we're not starting from scratch with this. There are literally hundreds of indicator systems out there to measure some aspects of water. So we had to begin by doing our homework, making sure we're not proposing something that's already been done, and really learning from the efforts that have gone before us. Now, one thing we found is that there's still a lack of comprehensive assessments. So people have tended to focus on one aspect of what we consider healthy freshwater systems, whether it's quantity or quality. And so we decided that there are three major pillars of healthy freshwater systems that we would like to be able to measure. And that is the ecosystems that provide water services. Then there are these services or the benefits to human populations. And then there's the water governance system itself. And so we wanted to go in an equal depth of all three of those to give as comprehensive a picture as we could of how freshwater systems are working. Now, another limitation of existing indicator systems was that they remain very conceptual or academic, and that is they're not applied in the real world. So we determined that we needed to test this out in the real world. If we're going to claim that it's useful, that we can actually measure freshwater health and that people can take decisions based on it, we have to ensure that decision makers can actually use that. And so that has involved a very iterative process on the ground. And so we came up with two what we call test beds, or basins in Asia, where we first applied this tool. One is in the lower Mekong Basin, and one is in China. And there we worked with a number of stakeholders, decision makers from different agencies, community groups, as well as academics and researchers, to look at the data that are available, to understand the informational needs that they have, and to determine where we can be flexible so that we have a consistent way to measure freshwater health, but that we can adapt it to the needs and the interests that we have anywhere in the world. And so that was about an 18-month process working in Asia, where we refined the tool and the approach. We determined how we can be flexible. And so then we started looking to other places in the world so we could create some more regional examples and obviously learn from those experiences. And that's why we were so excited when this opportunity came up for the second pilot project through the NED. There was a group that was really aligned with our thinking about participatory decision making and really had some complementary skills and interests that meshed well with what we were trying to do with the Freshwater Health Index. So we were very excited to establish a partnership and start applying the FHI in a new part of the world.
That sounds like a very, very interesting tool. Could you say a little bit more about these three pillars, perhaps? Are they equally weighted between themselves? And I guess they also have a lot of smaller indicators that feed into them, I suppose.
Yes, that's right. So we have the three pillars, and then within that there are 3 to 5 indicators that sit under there. And then those are composed of lesser indicators or sub-indicators. So in any given basin, we're trying to measure 30 to 35 different elements. Some have data, some do not, and we have to go out and collect the data. Ultimately, all three of those we do weight equally. And that's not a judgment that they are necessarily of equal importance, but if we overlook one of the elements, we're concerned that it won't be getting the attention that maybe deserves. So at the highest level, we're reporting scores from 0 to 100 for what we call ecosystem vitality. So that's the health of your rivers and lakes, the fish and other wildlife in there, as well as the forests and wetlands that are in place, because that's what ultimately delivers the services that people care about. But we also measure the services themselves, and that's not just water quality and quantity, it's protection from floods, preventing erosion, as well as cultural and recreational services that people enjoy from healthy fresh water. And then in the governance, we've looked at different dimensions of quote-unquote good governance, and we've come up with our own survey actually to measure those on the same 0 to 100 scale.
So in these two locations, I guess it's been applied so far. How has it been received to point?
So it's been a very interesting and iterative process because it was a completely new idea when we brought it forward, almost 2 years ago now. And we weren't starting from scratch in those basins. There had been efforts to collect data. However, in both cases, there had never been an attempt to really assimilate all of that and to synthesize it and to go through this participatory process where we have to convene the different agencies, the different community groups through a series of workshops where we get their feedback. And so all of that has been a learning experience for all of us, but it's been really beneficial in terms of creating and strengthening networks in the Mekong, in the lower Mekong, and in China, coming up with the first comprehensive assessments in each basin so that they can understand and really come to agreement on the level of health for these different elements. So if one person has a perception that water quality is good and others say it's not, we have simplified the way that you can determine where on the scale of 0 to 100 water quality currently lies. And one of the interesting things that has come out is we get the feedback that this first assessment is nice, but it isn't sufficient for us to make decisions because these basins, like a lot of the developing world, are changing very quickly, and there's a lot of pressure for economic development. There are plans to develop hydropower dams. There's a lot of forests being cleared for agriculture, and the cities are growing. And so the basins will be changing very quickly. So we can't simply monitor something that continues to go downhill. So what we have developed with these stakeholders is this process for also creating some future scenarios. It's a way for us to, with the stakeholders, explore the different courses that the future might take in terms of if hydropower is developed and dams are placed in certain locations, what might that mean for the fisheries downstream? What will that mean for the water supply and availability elsewhere in the basin? If land use changes, how does that impact freshwater health? And we're also able to look at some external impacts, such as climate change. So this has been a sort of new and exciting thing we've been working on in Asia, and this is actually a large focus of what we're doing now with the NED and in our work in Latin America. So we must complete the baseline assessment so we have that point of comparison, we understand what the current levels are, but we're investing a lot of time in creating these scenarios with stakeholders and really exploring the different paths that the future might take.
It seems to be an incredibly comprehensive tool that you've developed there. But it also sounds like, from what I've heard from the three of you, that it's not strictly a scientific undertaking. There's a substantial social component. Perhaps, Lina, you could tell us more about how that works.
Yeah, well, indeed, as Derek was mentioning, the social component and the integration of the stakeholders is an integral part of this process. So what we do in each basin is having participatory sessions. We have periodic meetings with the stakeholders in which we present the results of FHI calculations and also the progresses in hydrological modeling or climate change scenarios to receive their feedback and to exchange knowledge. And with this process, we apply also surveys to know what are the main concerns of the stakeholders in order to know what are the priorities, the needs, the problems that they may have in the basin. So this way we have a better picture of reality and we can have a better idea of what we can propose or we can recommend. So what we have learned from this is that the results that we obtain are only possible through a process of dialogue and trust. And this process is part of the result of the project itself, and also help us to understand better how the social component is changing during time. That creates awareness not only about science, about water, it creates awareness also about life, security, inequalities, sustainability, which in terms of sustainable development goals, it means that although we are working on SDG 6, water and sanitation, we are also having an impact on 6 more goals. And that's an important fact. And we are aware that this is just one step in a very long, long path. But transformations require that the social component becomes part of the single force that can create the solutions for nature and people.
Yeah, and I'll just add that as scientists, the challenges that we face in a project like this are not technical. We're not at the forefront of hydrological modeling or anything like that. Our challenges are really about communication and making those connections on the social side, understanding the dynamics among all these different stakeholders in a basin, understanding their priorities and their informational needs, and then being able to translate what we know and what we can calculate into terms that make sense to them and that they can use.
How do you go about establishing local partnerships? Is it through other organizations like the Water Center, or how does this go about?
It happens mainly because CI has presence in these countries and we are building relationships with them. But as I was saying, this is a process built through dialogue and trust day by day, and we have very regular meetings with them. And we should be present in this process through not only providing scientific information, but also to understand the necessities. So the products that we obtain are are related to the real facts and the priorities they have in the basins.
Oh, so knowledge goes both ways here.
Indeed,
Absolutely.
because in fact for us it's also a challenge. We are a group of 27 people from 6 different countries working together for these 3 basins. So internally it's a big challenge to apply all this communication and all this process of participation and exchange. So
Okay, and perhaps all 3 of you can answer this one at a time, not at the same time, but this is a year-long project, and it's soon wrapping up within the next few months.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, what do you hope to get out of it, and where will you go from here? What's the next steps?
well, during the next months, we are focused on obtaining the baseline of the current state of the basins for each basin, so we can discuss the results and the data with the stakeholders with the final meeting that we will have in Monterrey, and then we will have other meetings in each basin to receive their feedback and to exchange this knowledge with the stakeholders and the interested parts from each place. But we are looking for new opportunities because we are seeing that the stakeholders are very excited and engaged with this project. So we see many opportunities also related to continue with monitoring or exploring, for example, the impact of future scenarios applying this tool and the capacities we have at NED. So
Yeah, and so the goal with the Freshwater Health Index, wherever we apply it, is that in the first year, it is a bit experimental as we're testing out how it can be applied in a new context, in a new place, building or strengthening the partnerships there. But the ultimate goal is that the stakeholders that we're working with in that first year take ownership, have the technical capacity to complete the next baseline assessment in 3 to 5 years, know how to develop these scenarios and do the calculations, and commit to continuing using it as a monitoring tool and to guide their decisions. So with this project in Latin America, we're at that point where by the end of this year, we'll have the proof of concept of how you can measure freshwater health in these basins in Colombia, Brazil, and Peru. The stakeholders are very excited about having that assessment about what we can do with scenarios and how they can connect it to work and priorities they have over the next few years. So we see a year from now, we need to be investing in capacity building so that we can make that transition, which may take multiple years before there's enough capacity in place in each basin to conduct it completely independent of us. So that's what we would like to do next, and we will find the resources to do that so we can continue to support and move more and more of the capacity and the work over to stakeholders on the ground in those countries.
Right, and as Derek was saying, we at from the perspective of the center, we are very excited with this partnership, and there are several ideas that we are throwing in just to make sure that we continue the process and make sure that whatever we are doing sticks into the field. And from the perspective of once again the water center and what is next for NED, basically this is highly linked to what we foresee for the center, for the water center in the future. And as you know, the world is changing very quickly. We in the center need to evolve in such a way that we are at the forefront of the new ideas that are being generated in the universities. And for that reason, one of the things that we have acknowledged recently is that nowadays we do have the scientific tools to keep moving into a more integrated, holistic way to look at the problems. And this is not new, of course, and people have started to make sure that we tackle not only the water problems, but the energy problems and the food-related problems. And for that, we are in the process of transforming the center into a water center that also tackles energy and food issues. And the NED is very highly related to this because the NED was foreseen as a platform to tackle complex systems. And water, energy, food system is a very complex system, and we see that we are going to be moving much more into those type of problems.
Oh, sounds like fascinating initiatives and projects, and a very promising partnership you've developed here. So thank you very much for joining us here in the SOFA, and hope to hear back from you again perhaps next year.
Yeah, thanks,
Thank
Eric.
you.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning into the SOFA here at the World Water Week. Stay tuned for more episodes throughout the week.